Hello and welcome back to the AEW News channel, and on today's video we're going to be breaking down the AEW Full Gear pay-per-view. And this one was a great pay-per-view and had a little bit of everything for everyone, whether you like hardcore brawls, technical wrestling matches, or a little bit of comedy. And if you want to see daily AEW content, make sure you subscribe with notifications turned on. And while you're down there, why not drop a like on the video? It helps me out a lot. But without any further ado, let's get in to the results of AEW Full Gear. So let's start with the pre-show then, where we saw Serena Deeb defend her NWA Women's Championship against Allison Kay, who is making her AEW debut. And overall this was a good technical match, a little bit slow, but it was the first match of the night, so I guess this was just to warm the crowd up. And yeah, it didn't ever seem to really pick up a pace, but ultimately Serena Deeb got the victory via submission. Then at the end, Thunder Rosa came out, and it seems that she will be going back after Serena Deeb for the NWA Women's Championship that she lost. But as I say, good match overall, but let's get into now the main show. Then we opened the show with a banger between Kenny Omega and Hangman Page for the number one contendership at the AEW World Champion. So the winner of this will be facing either Jon Moxley or Eddie Kingston, depending on who wins tonight's main event, and obviously we'll cover that a little bit later. And joining the commentary team is Don Callis. So that's interesting that the EVP of Impact Wrestling was in attendance for this one. Maybe this symbolizes a future relationship with Impact, or maybe it's just a one-off since he's close with Kenny Omega, but obviously we'll find out in the future. But yeah, interesting to see him here tonight. For this match at least, JR seemed to have some big improvements. Generally, I have a few issues with the way JR calls matches in AEW. He doesn't seem to take it too seriously, and it kind of takes you out of it. An example of some good commentary from Don Callis was how he called the dive over the top rope to the outside, and he mentioned how the snap of the hips from Omega adds some extra power to the move, whereas Jim Ross would normally just take the piss out of the name. He would go, Tope Suicida, haha, Excalibur, etc, etc. But at least for this match, JR seemed to get better when he was in the booth with Don Callis. I don't know whether there's a link there or whether it was just happenstance, but he did seem to make some bad calls later on, which we'll cover a little bit later. But ultimately, a great match as always with Kenny Omega and Hangman Page, but Kenny Omega got the victory with a double V-trigger into the one-winged angel. And in the finishing sequence to this match, Hangman Page was trying to fight out of the one-winged angel, which was a nice touch, but ultimately Kenny managed to get his head and neck and drive him into the canvas and drop him for the victory. But yeah, solid match. And yeah, as I say, commentary was especially good for this one. And after an intense start to the pay-per-view, we kind of brought it down a touch with the Orange Cassidy John Silver match. And of course, this one was a little bit more light-hearted. Orange Cassidy started off by evading Silver with his usual tactics, but Silver did eventually get some offense, slowing Cassidy down, if that's even possible. But ultimately, Cassidy makes a comeback and gets the win. And yeah, I think this was well placed after the intense start, as I say, and some funny moments in there with Orange Cassidy and John Silver, and sort of just brought everything down a touch, ready for the rest of the pay-per-view. So yeah, solid match overall. And then following this, we went into our first AEW title match of the night and the second title match overall. And in this one, Cody is defending his AEW TNT Championship against Darby Allin. And for this one, Darby came out on top of a painted car, the one that we've been seeing in the vignettes recently, and then he smashes the window with his skateboard and makes his way to the ring. Darby on this one looked legit nervous, at least that's how I saw it, unless he's just a good actor. But yeah, before the match, he had a look on his face where he looked a little bit nervous ahead of what might be happening tonight, and it is a big moment for him, as we'll get into later. And then Cody was introduced by Justin Roberts as Cody Rhodes, which is something that he said this week wasn't going to be happening, so I don't know whether he's changed his mind or whether he just wanted to keep it as a surprise for the pay-per-view. But at the start of the match, Cody was overpowering Darby, shutting down any offense. And yeah, it was quite hard not to notice the size difference in this one. Cody's either got massive or Darby's just really small. Then Darby did turn the tides when he exposed the turnbuckle, sending Cody headfirst into that. Then we saw a big crossroads off the top rope, but Darby luckily rolled towards the ropes for that one. After a lot of impact, the referee broke the pin after his arm was under the rope. Then we saw Cody kick out of the coffin drop, but then they went into back and forth cradles where they roll and they get the 1-2, the 1-2, 1-2. But then out of nowhere, in this exchange, Cody was pinned by Darby with a 1-2-3 in a surprise and unique finish out of nowhere. And again, good match, good storytelling between these two. And then after the match, Cody hands the belt to Darby, and it was a great moment for him. And then Taz did come out after the match, which he said he was going to be keeping an eye on this one on Dynamite this week. And then Team Taz came up from behind and attacked both men, of course Starks and Cage. Then they dragged Darby into the crowd, and then we're going to smash his arm in Darby's car door. But then Will Hobbs makes the save with a steel chair, and the rumours weren't true. There's going to be no Sting on this pay-per-view, unfortunately. But yeah, as I say, good match. And continuing the storyline here between Team Taz and Darby Allin, and now it seems like Cody is involved. And next up we go into another championship match, this time between Hikaru Shida defending her AEW Women's Championship against Nyla Rose. And early on this was very fast paced, Shida using her speed to get an early advantage as she takes Nyla off her feet. And yeah, this was a big contrast in comparison to the last match where Cody and Darby had quite a slow start with Cody's offense as he overpowered Darby. But in this one, it was the complete opposite. Nyla went to get a weapon from under the ring, but Aubrey Edwards ended up stopping her, which allowed Vicky to use a kendo stick behind the referee's back. And then Nyla Rose begins to dominate from this point. So this was a shift in momentum towards her. But throughout the match, Shida had some good strength spots, and she hit an avalanche Falcon Arrow, but then Shida lifts Nyla's head up, breaking the count herself, which was a nice touch. And yeah, she had some good intensity on her face here. Then she runs off the ropes, Vicky gets involved, grabs the leg, and then they both end up outside. And then the referee stops Vicky from using the kendo stick this time, which allows Shida to push Nyla into Vicky. And then they end up back in the ring, which leads to the finish where Shida gets repeated knees to the head, which means that she has retained the Women's Championship. And then after the match, Vicky Guerrero seemed pretty angry at Nyla, screaming in her face and then walking off. So a little bit of a tease of a possible breakup here, but we'll see where that goes heading forward as Shida retains. And next up we go into another championship match. This time FTR will be defending the tag team championships against the Young Bucks. And of course, if the Young Bucks fail to win this one, they can never challenge for the titles again. And I've got in my notes here, the hype is real because I was pumped for this one. But Matt Jackson actually starts the match, even though he's got a leg injury, supposedly. And yeah, he starts off selling the leg quite early on, and Cash takes advantage of that, of course, aiming at the body part. Classic wrestling there. Then FTR managed to slow the pace down early on, grounding their opponents. And yeah, a bit of an old school vibe here at the start. FTR really enforcing their style on the Young Bucks. And then eventually Dax cuts his hand open. I didn't actually catch how this happened, but he ends up having to have it taped up outside by the doctor. I guess this is a deliberate attempt to equal the odds and sort of have his hand bust open to equal Matt's leg or ankle being done in. But yeah, FTR do a good job of isolating Matt throughout the match. But then Matt manages to outsmart FTR and get the hot tag, and a big pop from the crowd for this. And then some good offense from Nick as he takes out FTR. And throughout the match, there was a lot of tributes to legendary tag teams. We saw moves from the Hart Foundation and the Steiner Brothers from FTR. And the Bucks did a 3D into a Twist of Fate Swanton combination, which was good to see as well, of course, paying tribute to each of their inspirations. We also did see the DIY double knee spot from FTR, which was a nice callback to their NXT days. And speaking of the JR calls that I was mentioning earlier, there was a sharpshooter spot where I can't remember who it was in the ring and outside the ring, but one of FTR were locked into a sharpshooter by one of the Bucks. But the other Buck super kicked his hand off the ropes, and then JR was going on about it for way too long and basically burying the ref and the wrestlers at the same time. You'll know what I mean if you saw it. But yeah, that's just the kind of thing that I was talking about earlier. And yeah, it kind of takes you out of it, but the match continued anyway. And then Cash manages to knock out Matt with a kick, but instead of going for the obvious count, he attempts a springboard 450, which is very unlike them. But then Matt rolls out of the way and hits a super kick for the win, meaning the Young Bucks are the new AEW Tag Team Champions. And yeah, great tag team match. You can imagine these guys have been running this match through their head for years now. And here it is with the payoff. And the Young Bucks taking the Tag Team Championships away from FTR. But yeah, the right call here to make sure that the Young Bucks can actually challenge for the titles as I mentioned in my predictions, I think that would have been a silly idea to go through with that stipulation. And one of the highlights of the show for me. But let's move on then. And next up we go into the Elite Deletion match between Matt Hardy and Sammy Guevara. So we went over to North Carolina at Matt Hardy's compound. And Sammy rides in on a golf cart and runs over like a tiny little car. It might have been a remote control car, something like that. And he squashes that with his golf cart. And then Matt is on the phone to someone predicting Sammy won't be alone and is preparing backup. So we'll find out who that backup is a little bit later on. Then Matt Hardy shows up in a monster truck and crushes the golf cart, which is a callback to the start of the match where Sammy drove over a tiny car with a golf cart, which is still in itself a tiny car. But yeah, nice little thing going on there. But luckily for Sammy, he hasn't been crushed by the monster truck and he's escaped and jumps off the monster truck as the match begins. And then they fight in the trees and on Matt's front lawn, eventually ending up in a ring. And I noticed this one was a lot less cinematic than a lot of the previous Matt Hardy compound matches. But anyway, it was right for Matt Hardy to arrange some backup as Santana and Ortiz eventually interfered after Sammy is put through a table. And then we find out that the backup for Matt was actually Private Party, who Matt calls in on a walkie-talkie. Then we see some fireworks with Sammy and Matt each having one firing them back at each other. Then Matt goes to throw Sammy in the Lake of Reincarnation, and then we hear a deep voice telling him to stop. And there's a masked man holding the hurricane who is back within this story realm. And it turns out the man with the mask on was Gangrel. And at one point, Hurricane turns into Gregory Helms after being thrown back into the lake, and he gets thrown again into the lake, and he comes back as the Hurricane. And then it just becomes Sammy and Matt locked inside the dome of Deletion. And then we see a couple of repeat spots with Matt getting some revenge on Sammy. So this time it's Matt throwing a chair at Sammy's head, and this time it's Matt spearing Sammy off something through a table. And yes, Sammy hit the back of his head. He had blood coming out. Of course, this was shot so you didn't actually see him hit the floor. And eventually he finishes Sammy off with a concerto to the concrete floor. Then Sammy is put in a wheelie bin, and at the end we also get a cameo from Rebby Hardy playing piano and Senior Benjamin, who takes Sammy away in a truck as the bin is put on the back of it. But overall a fun match, I guess, but these matches are starting to lose a little bit of their uniqueness. It was nice to see Gangrel get involved, and yeah, something different for the pay-per-view and another bit of variety for everyone to enjoy. And next up we go into the MJF Chris Jericho match, where if MJF wins, he joins the Inner Circle. And we start off with MJF imitating Jericho's old entrance. So he had the sparkly jacket, he was doing the pose at the top of the ramp. But yeah, it turns out to be MJF. And then there's a big babyface reaction for Jericho as he makes his way to the ring. And then MJF stands on the corner to loud boos as he tries to steal Jericho's thunder there. And a bit of a slugfest to start, but if you want slugfests, wait for a little bit later on in the main event. But for now, MJF tries to work on Jericho's arm, seemingly to neutralize the Judas effect. But ultimately, it seemed that it paid off because MJF catches the Judas effect after Jericho tries to hit it, and he locks in the Salt of the Earth Fujiwara armbar. But Jericho does manage to escape, which leads to MJF signaling to Wardlow for the Dynamite Diamond ring. So Wardlow comes out from the back, gives him the ring, the referee spots it. The ref goes to stop Wardlow giving him the ring, which allows Jake Hager to hand a baseball bat to Chris Jericho while the ref deals with Wardlow. And then MJF pulls off an Eddie Guerrero type spot where he drops to the floor pretending that Jericho hit him. The ref turns around, sees what's gone on, but this whole situation causes a distraction for Jericho as MJF rolls him up for the victory, holding on to the trunks. And now MJF and Wardlow have seemed to join the Inner Circle, and after the match MJF and Jericho hug. So yeah, all seems well in the Inner Circle, at least for now. But yeah, overall a good match as we head into the main event now. So main event in the show then is Jon Moxley defending his AEW World Championship against old friend Eddie Kingston. This is an I quit match, so the only way to win is to make your opponent say I quit. We see Eddie Kingston make his way to the ring, and then Jon Moxley comes through the crowd in classic Moxley fashion. Eddie is just yelling at Moxley before the match even begins, and he tells him that he's gonna fuck him up. And there's a lot of emotion on Moxley's face for this one. You can tell that it means a lot to him. And Moxley seems to do a cross on his chest, and it seems like he's paying tribute to someone that's died. I'm not exactly sure who that would be, but I'd imagine it might be one of Eddie and John's friends that they're close to. But yeah, as I say, he was very emotional towards the beginning of this one. As I said earlier, there was a slugfest to start the MJF Chris Jericho match, but this one was a slugfest throughout. There was punches, slaps and chops to begin, and very little wrestling holds, and this was a fight. The brawl ended up at ringside with chairs and barbed wire baseball bats coming into play. Kingston ends up putting barbed wire around his fist, using it to ground and pound Moxley on the floor, and then he hits him with a big spinning back fist as well, with the barbed wire still wrapped around his fist. And yeah, again, just a hardcore brawl. Then Eddie Kingston brought thumbtacks into play and put them on the canvas, and he eventually back suplexes Moxley right into them, which causes thumbtacks to be stuck in the back of Moxley. And adding to this punishment, Kingston gets a bottle of rubbing alcohol, something that a doctor would use to put on a wound to clean it out. And if you've ever had a wound cleaned out, you know that it stings like hell. And this leads to Kingston pouring this alcohol all over the wounded back of Jon Moxley. And as I say, this is just brutal. We go back and forth with a bulldog choke. Of course, this was the move that started this whole thing, where Moxley beat Kingston by bulldog choke, making him pass out, which is the real fuel of this match, where Kingston is saying that he didn't give up, which of course led to the I Quit stipulation that we're seeing right now. And both men managed to fight out of each other's choke, but finally Moxley wraps the barbed wire around his arm and then locks in the bulldog choke once again, and this time Eddie Kingston is forced to give up. So yeah, what a way to end the show there. We do see Moxley helping Kingston up after the match, but he's not having any of it and ends up just walking out. And we do see a glimpse of Kenny Omega, who comes out and seems to be making himself known to Jon Moxley. Of course, he's now the #1 contender, so at some point we're going to see Moxley versus Kenny Omega. But as I say, overall, another great pay-per-view from AEW after the disappointment, I guess, of AEW All Out, where it was just had that weird vibe after the whole Matt Hardy thing. But yeah, everyone stepped up tonight and really put the shift in and put on great performances throughout the card. But let me know what you think of AEW Full Gear in the comments down below. And what was your favourite match of the night? Make sure you let me know. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe with notifications turned on so you don't miss any daily AEW content. And why not drop a like while you're down there. But until next time, peace.